All right, so ready to dive deep into the 7 habits of highly effective people.
Always a good time to revisit the classics, right?
It's one of those books I feel like I could reread every year and still find something new.
Oh, absolutely. The wisdom in those pages really is timeless.
And we've got your notes and highlights right here, ready to go.
Fantastic. I'm always curious to see what resonates with people.
So let's jump in and see what we can unpack together.
Sounds great.
One of the first things that really grabbed my attention was this whole concept of paradigms.
Ah, yes, paradigms.
The book uses that optical illusion, the one where you can see either a young woman or an old woman, depending on how you look at it.
Right, right. That's such a brilliant visual. Really drives home the point that our perceptions shape our reality.
And often we're totally unaware of those paradigms operating in the background.
Yeah.
We just assume our view is the objective truth.
Exactly. We're all wearing these lenses, so to speak, and they color everything we see.
So how do we even begin to become aware of those lenses if we don't even know they're there?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? The book gives us some tools and frameworks for examining our own thinking. It encourages us to question those assumptions that we often take for granted.
You highlighted a passage about feeling stuck in a rut.
Hmm.
Uh, do you think maybe our paradigms play a role in that stuck feeling?
Oh, absolutely. If our paradigm is, I'm just not good at this, or things will never change, that becomes our reality.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
And so if we want to make big changes, it's not enough to just tweak our habits on the surface level.
Right. We have to go deeper. We have to shift those underlying paradigms, those assumptions that are holding us back.
It's like wanting to build a skyscraper, but realizing the ground beneath is shaky.
Love that analogy.
You need a stronger foundation before you can build anything truly substantial.
Couldn't agree more. And that brings us to the book's distinction between the character ethic and the personality ethic.
Yes, this part really resonated with me.
So many of those quick fix personality techniques are like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. You might cover it up temporarily, but you haven't addressed the real issue.
Yeah, it's like trying to get a suntan when you're anemic.
Yeah,
You might look healthier on the surface, but the underlying problem is still there.
exactly. The book argues that true effectiveness flows from a solid character, those inner principles and values.
It's about being, not just doing.
Precisely.
And that reminded me of the example in the book, get-rich-quick schemes versus building true financial assets. One is fleeting, the other has real staying power.
Right. One is focused on appearances and short-term gain, while the other is about developing the substance that leads to true abundance.
You mentioned in your notes that you've been struggling with consistency.
Mm.
Could this character versus personality idea be playing a role there?
That's a good question. I think maybe I've been focusing too much on trying to look like I have it all together instead of developing the inner strength and discipline to actually, be consistent.
So it's about moving beyond that superficial facade and really cultivating those deeper qualities that will sustain us in the long run.
I think so.
So are we focused on just looking good on the surface or developing the substance that truly makes us effective? That actually reminds me of another concept from the book, the PPC balance.
Oh, yes, production versus production capability. Such a fundamental principle.
It seems simple on the surface, but the book gives some pretty powerful examples of where we get this wrong in life and how costly it can be.
It's about understanding that if we keep demanding the golden eggs without taking care of the goose that produces them, we'll eventually deplete our most valuable asset.
It's like that story of the goose that laid the golden egg.
Exactly.
If you kill the goose to get all the eggs at once, well, you're out of luck.
It's about sustainable success, not just squeezing out every last drop right now.
You mentioned feeling burnt out at work. Um, could that be a sign of focusing too much on production and neglecting production capability?
That's a really good point. I've definitely been pushing myself hard lately, always focused on the next deadline, the next deliverable.
But maybe it's time to step back and think about how to nurture that goose, that source of your effectiveness.
Yeah, I think you're right. I need to invest more time and energy in self-care and professional development in things that will replenish my energy and creativity.
And that reminds me of another key idea, the maturity continuum. The book talks about moving from dependence to independence and then to interdependence.
Oh, yes. This is such an important
I
progress.
underlined this part a bunch of times because it really struck a chord with me.
It's all about understanding where we are on that continuum and then consciously choosing to move towards greater maturity.
So someone who's still dependent can't just jump into being interdependent.
Right. They haven't yet developed that inner strength, that self-reliance, that's necessary for healthy interdependence.
So it's like trying to run before you can walk.
Exactly. We need to master those earlier stages before we can truly thrive in a state of interdependence.
Which brings us to habit one, proactivity.
The foundation of it all.
It's about that freedom to choose our response no matter what the circumstance.
It's incredibly empowering, isn't it?
The book uses the powerful example of Viktor Frankl finding this freedom, even in a concentration camp. It really highlights the power we have even in the toughest situations.
It's a powerful reminder that no matter what life throws our way, we always have the power to choose our response.
And that choice determines our experience.
Absolutely.
So how do we cultivate that proactive muscle?
One way is to become aware of our language. Do we find ourselves saying things like, I have to, or they make me feel?
It's like we're giving away our power, handing over the steering wheel to someone else and saying, take me wherever you want.
Exactly. So instead, let's choose language that reflects our freedom to choose our response. Instead of saying, my work stresses me out, we can say, I'm choosing to let this work situation stress me out.
It's a subtle shift, but it can make a world of difference.
It's about taking ownership of our experience. We may not be able to control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond.
So instead of feeling like a victim of circumstance, we're taking back our power.
Precisely.
Okay, so we're recognizing our freedom to choose, we're taking responsibility for our responses, and that leads us nicely into the next concept, the circle of influence.
Ah, yes, a powerful tool for focusing our energy where it matters most.
It's about recognizing, what do I have direct control over? What can I influence?
Right.
And what do I have absolutely no control over?
Right. We all have a limited amount of time and energy, so it's essential to be strategic with where we direct those resources.
The book contrasts those executives who focus on their circle of concern, wasting energy on things they can't control, with those who proactively expand their circle of influence.
And it's not about ignoring the things that concern us. It's about recognizing that worry and complaining won't change anything unless we channel that energy into taking positive action.
You mentioned feeling overwhelmed with work responsibilities. Could the circle of influence help with that?
You know, I think it could. Instead of feeling paralyzed by this long to-do list, I could ask myself, okay, which of these tasks are truly within my control? Where can I make the biggest impact?
So it's about being proactive, choosing where to focus your energy, and not getting bogged down by things you can't change.
Right. It's about choosing to focus on what you can control and letting go of the rest.
Love it.
Hmm.
We're taking responsibility for our choices, focusing on what we can influence, and that brings us to a habit that can be quite intense, but also incredibly empowering, beginning with the end in mind.
Ah, yes. This one really makes you think.
And the book has this really powerful visualization exercise, imagining your own funeral.
Oh, yes. The funeral visualization. Not for the faint of heart.
It's definitely a bit morbid, but also incredibly insightful.
It forces us to confront those big questions about what truly matters. What do we want our lives to stand for? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
It goes beyond those abstract someday goals and makes us think about what we want our life to truly represent.
Exactly. And once we have a clear sense of our desired end, we can start making choices today that align with that vision.
So it's about connecting our daily actions to that ultimate purpose.
Right. We're not just drifting through life.
Mm.
We're consciously creating a life that reflects our deepest values and aspirations.
It could be a powerful springboard for writing a personal mission statement too, right? That guiding document that outlines our core values and long-term goals.
Absolutely. It's about putting those insights from the funeral visualization into words, creating a tangible reminder of what we're striving for.
I saw in your notes that you'd started drafting one. How's that process going?
It's been really thought-provoking. It's challenging to distill your entire life's purpose into a few sentences, but also incredibly rewarding.
And mission statements aren't just for individuals.
Right.
The book talks about how organizations can benefit from having a clear mission statement that everyone is aligned with.
Absolutely. When a team or organization has that shared sense of purpose, it can create incredible synergy and focus.
It's like everyone is rowing the boat in the same direction.
Exactly. Everyone knows where they're going and why, and that makes all the difference.
So powerful. That shared purpose can really make or break a team.
Absolutely. When everyone is aligned around a common mission, amazing things can happen. And when everyone knows where they're going and why that shared mission, it makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's like having that compass to guide you through all the ups and downs. So speaking of effectiveness, that brings us to one of the most practical tools in the book, the time management matrix. I remember the first time I tried to map out my tasks and projects using those four quadrants. Urgent, important, important, not urgent, not important, and not urgent, not important.
It's a game changer, isn't it?
It was definitely eye-opening to see how much time I was spending on things that were urgent but not actually important.
We've all been there, right?
Oh yeah, drowning in emails and deadlines, but not making progress on those bigger goals that truly matter.
The time management matrix helps us see those activities that are truly important, the ones that contribute to our long-term goals and values, and distinguish them from those urgent tasks that can easily distract us from what really matters.
You mentioned in your notes that you've been wanting to spend more time with family, but feeling like work constantly gets in the way. Could the time management matrix offer some insights there?
I think it could. I'm definitely spending a lot of time in quadrant dealing with those urgent and important tasks at work. But quadrant two, those important, not urgent activities, things like planning relationship, building personal development, that's where I really want to be spending more time.
And that takes discipline, right? I remember the book talking about the power of saying no to good things in order to say yes to the best things.
It does. It's so easy to get caught up in that whirlwind of activity, always feeling busy, but not necessarily productive in the ways that matter most.
So it's about being intentional with our time and energy, recognizing that we can't do everything,
Mm-hmm.
and making conscious choices about where we focus our efforts.
Exactly. And sometimes that means saying no to things that seem important in the moment, but that ultimately distract us from our true priorities.
So instead of feeling guilty about saying no to that extra project at work, we can reframe it as saying yes to spending quality time with our family.
I love that. It's about aligning our actions with our values and priorities. And speaking of relationships, that brings us to a concept that I find particularly powerful, the emotional bank account.
Oh, yes. This one really resonated with me too. It's that beautiful metaphor of making deposits and withdrawals in our relationships.
It goes beyond just being nice, doesn't it?
It really does. It's about understanding what truly matters to the other person and acting accordingly.
It's about those small, everyday acts of kindness, those moments of truly listening to understand, of keeping commitments, of showing appreciation and affection.
You highlighted a passage about feeling disconnected from your partner. Could that be a sign that some withdrawals have been made from that emotional bank account?
It's definitely something to reflect on. I think maybe I haven't been as attentive as I could be. I've been so focused on work and other commitments that I've neglected to make those deposits in a relationship.
So what are some things you can do to rebuild that trust and connection?
Well, I think it starts with simply being more present, putting away my phone, really listening when my partner is talking.
Making those small gestures that show you care.
Exactly. Like bringing home their favorite coffee or offering a back rub after a long day.
Those little things really do add up over time.
They do. It's about creating those positive interactions that build a foundation of love and connection.
And that foundation of trust and security is so important, especially when those inevitable withdrawals do happen. Because let's face it, we're all human and we make mistakes.
Absolutely. No one is perfect. We're all going to mess up sometimes. But if we've built up that reserve of goodwill in the relationship, those withdrawals won't be as damaging.
It's like having that safety net to catch us when we stumble.
Exactly. And speaking of understanding, that brings us to another crucial habit, empathic listening.
Ah, yes. This one was a bit of a wake-up call for me.
In what way?
I realized how often I'm just waiting for my turn to talk instead of truly listening to understand what the other person is saying.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, isn't it? We're so focused on formulating our response that we miss what's really going on with the other person.
And the book goes beyond just saying listen more. It breaks down empathic listening into those four stages, right?
Mimicking rephrasing, reflecting feeling, and rephrasing and reflecting feeling.
And that four-stage rephrasing and reflecting feeling, that's where the real magic happens. We're not just reflecting back the content of what the other person is saying, but also the underlying feeling.
Exactly. It's about connecting with the emotion behind the words. That's where true understanding and connection begin.
You mentioned in your notes that you sometimes feel like your friends don't really get you. Could a lack of empathic listening be contributing to that feeling?
That's an interesting thought. I think maybe I haven't been as open and vulnerable with them as I could be. And maybe they haven't been listening in a way that makes me feel truly heard and understood.
The book gives that great example of the father trying to help his son, who is struggling in school. He keeps offering advice and solutions, but he never truly listens to understand what his son is actually feeling.
Oh, I remember that one. It's a classic example of how our good intentions can sometimes backfire if we're not careful.
We've all been there on both sides of those conversations. It's so easy to jump into problem-solving mode, but sometimes what people really need is just to feel heard and validated.
Absolutely. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen with empathy, without judgment or trying to fix things.
So in that example with the father and son, instead of saying, you're having a hard time with school, the father might say something like, you sound really frustrated and discouraged about school.
Yes, that subtle shift can make a world of difference. When we accurately reflect back both the content and the feeling, we create a sense of deep understanding and validation. We're letting the other person know, I'm really with you. I get where you're coming from.
It creates that safe space for them to open up even more to share what's really going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And that deeper understanding, that connection, is what sets the stage for the next habit synergy.
Synergy, that's where the real magic happens, right?
Yeah.
It's where we move beyond just compromise to create solutions that are better than what either person could have come up with on their own.
It really is. Synergy is that 1 plus 1 3 equation where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
But it's not just about brainstorming and coming up with creative ideas, is it?
No, it requires a certain mindset, a willingness to value and leverage the differences in perspectives and ideas.
And that takes trust, doesn't it? Trust that everyone involved has something valuable to contribute.
Absolutely. Synergy can't happen in an environment of fear or judgment. We need to feel safe to share our ideas, even if they're different from the norm.
You mentioned in your notes that you sometimes feel like you hold back in meetings, like you're not really contributing your full potential.
Hmm.
Could this idea of synergy offer a new way to approach those situations?
I think it could. Instead of seeing those meetings as battles to be won, what if I viewed them as opportunities to create something truly remarkable together?
It's about shifting our mindset from competition to collaboration, from me versus them to we.
Exactly. And I think that shift starts with cultivating that sense of trust and respect for everyone in the room.
So powerful. And that brings us to the final habit, sharpening the saw.
Ah, yes, the habit of renewal.
It's about investing in ourselves
Mm.
so we can be our best, and it encompasses those four key dimensions of our nature: physical, spiritual, mental, and social emotional.
It's about recognizing that we can't pour from an empty cup. We have to take care of ourselves in order to effectively care for others.
You mentioned feeling drained lately, like you're running on fumes. It sounds like sharpening the saw might be the perfect remedy for that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've been so focused on giving to everyone else that I've neglected my own needs. So let's talk about those four dimensions. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with the physical dimension. What are some things we can do to take care of our bodies?
The basics are always a good place to start. Getting enough sleep, eating nutritious foods, moving our bodies regularly. Those are all essential for physical renewal. Those are all essential for physical renewal. But it's not just about checking boxes.
Right. It's about finding activities that we genuinely enjoy that make us feel good in our bodies.
Exactly. It could be dancing, hiking, swimming, yoga, whatever brings you joy and helps you feel energized and alive.
So it's about tuning into what our bodies need and then honoring those needs.
And then we have the spiritual dimension.
This one feels a little less tangible than, say, going for a run. How do we even define spiritual?
It's a good question. I think for some people it's about connecting with a higher power through religion or spirituality.
Makes sense.
But it doesn't have to be about organized religion. It can be anything that nourishes your soul, that connects you to something bigger than yourself.
So it's about finding that sense of meaning and purpose.
Exactly. It could be through meditation, spending time in nature, creating art, volunteering, whatever helps you feel connected to something greater.
You mentioned feeling a bit lost in terms of your overall direction. Could exploring that spiritual side help with finding some clarity?
I think it could. When we feel lost, it's often because we've lost touch with those deeper values that guide us. Reconnecting with those values, with that inner compass, can help us get back on track.
It's like we've been so busy navigating the external world
Yeah.
that we've forgotten to check in with our internal world.
Exactly.
So how do we start to reconnect with that inner compass?
Well, I think it starts with simply creating space for reflection. Maybe that's through journaling, meditation, or just taking some quiet time in nature. Whatever helps you quiet the noise of the outside world and tune into your own inner wisdom.
Love that.
Yeah.
And then there's the mental dimension, expanding our minds and keeping those mental gears turning.
Absolutely. This is all about learning, growing, and challenging ourselves intellectually.
So it's not just about, zoning out in front of the TV.
No, it's about actively engaging with the world around us, seeking out new information, ideas, and perspectives.
It could be reading, Taking a class, listening to podcasts, having thought-provoking conversations.
Exactly. Anything that stimulates your mind and helps you grow intellectually.
You mentioned in your notes that you've been wanting to learn a new language but feeling like there's just no time. Could this be a way to integrate mental renewal into your already busy life?
You know what I think it could? Instead of seeing it as one more thing to add to my to-do list, I could reframe it as a form of self-care. Learning a new language can be so much fun, and it's a great way to challenge my brain.
It's like a mental workout.
Exactly.
And who knows, it might even open up new opportunities or connections in your life.
Exactly. And then finally, we have the social and emotional dimension.
The realm of relationships and emotional intelligence.
Exactly. It's about nurturing those connections with others, developing our empathy, and learning to manage our own emotions effectively.
This ties back to so much of what we've already discussed, doesn't it? Those habits of empathic listening, think win-win synergy, they all play a role in building healthy, interdependent relationships.
They absolutely do. Those habits provide the foundation for strong, meaningful connections.
You mentioned wanting to improve your communication skills, especially when it comes to resolving conflicts. Could focusing on this social-emotional dimension help with that?
Definitely learning to communicate assertively, setting healthy boundaries, and developing those conflict resolution skills, these are all essential aspects of social emotional renewal.
So it's like investing in the toolkit for healthy relationships.
Exactly. And it's not just about romantic relationships either. These skills are invaluable in our friendships, families, and even in the workplace.
So it's about showing up as our best selves in all areas of life.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what sharpening the saw is all about. It's about taking a holistic approach to our well-being, nurturing ourselves physically, spiritually, mentally, and socially so that we can show up in the world as the most effective and fulfilled version of ourselves.
And it's important to remember that these four dimensions aren't isolated compartments.
Right.
They're all interconnected.
Absolutely. When we neglect one area, it inevitably impacts the others.
It's like those old school stereo systems with
Yep.
all the different components.
I remember those.
You need each one working properly for the whole system to function at its best.
Great analogy.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the 7 habits of highly effective people,
Hmm.
what are some key takeaways that our listeners can walk away with? What really stands out to you?
I think what's so powerful about these 7 habits is that they work together synergistically. They build upon each other to create this incredibly powerful framework for personal and interpersonal effectiveness.
It's not about picking and choosing which habits we like.
Right.
It's about embracing that whole journey of personal growth from dependence to interdependence.
And it's a journey that requires effort and commitment. These habits aren't quick fixes. They're fundamental principles that we need to internalize and practice consistently if we want to see lasting results.
So for someone who is just beginning to explore these habits, where would you recommend they start?
I always recommend starting with habit 1, proactivity. It's the foundation of it all.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our response to any situation.
Exactly. And once we've begun to internalize that proactive mindset, we can start to layer on the other habits, beginning with the end in mind, putting first things first, seeking to understand before being understood.
It's like building a house.
Ugh.
You start with the foundation and then you build up from there.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that it's a lifelong journey. We're never going to reach some point of perfect effectiveness. It's about continuous improvement, always striving to be a little bit better each day.
And that ties in so beautifully with habit 7, sharpening the saw. It's about making that commitment to constantly renew and refine ourselves in all areas of life.
So we can continue to grow and evolve.
It's been such a pleasure exploring the 7 habits with you today. Thank you for sharing your insights and for helping us connect these powerful principles to real life.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the real power of these habits lies in putting them into practice. So take what resonates with you. Start small, be consistent, and watch as you create those ripples of positive change in your own life and beyond.
Beautifully said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 7 habits of highly effective people. We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we did. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to live a life of purpose and effectiveness.